The sun hung low over Copper Ridge, like a judge's gavel, casting long shadows across the auction platform where human dignity went to die. It was 1882, and the town square had been transformed into a marketplace of desperation. Foreclosed properties, seized livestock, and repossessed goods lined the dusty street, each item representing someone's collapsed dream. But the cruelest auction of all stood at the center, the one that made even hardened frontiersmen look away in shame. The widow auction. Beatrice Sullivan stood on the platform, her substantial frame draped in a black dress that had seen better days, her face a mask of barely contained fury. At 42 years old and nearly 200 pounds, she was everything the frontier considered unmarketable. Too old, too heavy, too defiant. The other widows on the platform, younger and more conventionally attractive, had already been purchased by ranchers looking for cheap labor disguised as matrimony. But Beatrice remained, a monument to society's cruelty, while the auctioneer's voice grew increasingly desperate. "Do I hear $1? $1 for a strong worker?" The auctioneer, a weasel of a man named Clarence Potts, tried to inject enthusiasm into his voice, but even he sounded embarrassed. "Mrs. Sullivan here can cook, clean, and manage a household. She's got experience and, stamina." Someone in the crowd laughed, a cruel bark of mockery. "More stamina than her late husband, that's for sure." The voice belonged to Vernon Blake, the banker who'd foreclosed on Beatrice's property after her husband died. 3 years for her to pay off them debts. And she couldn't manage it. Now she's county property being sold like a mule, and about as appealing. Beatrice's hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. She wanted to scream, to leap off the platform and throttle Vernon Blake until his smug face turned purple. But she remained still, chin raised, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She'd already cried all her tears in private. Now there was only rage, cold and sustaining as winter iron. The auction had been the county's solution to her debt. When her husband Thomas died of pneumonia 3 years ago, he'd left her with a small farm, a mountain of medical bills, and no way to pay them. Beatrice had tried everything. She'd sold their livestock, their furniture, even her wedding ring. She'd taken in laundry, baked pies for sale, worked her fingers to the bone, but it was never enough. The interest on the debt grew faster than she could earn, and Vernon Blake had been relentless in his collection efforts. Finally, when she'd fallen behind by 6 months, Blake had invoked an old territorial law that allowed debtors to be auctioned into indentured servitude. It was slavery by another name, though no one dared call it that. The winner of the auction would gain Beatrice's labor for 5 years, during which her work would pay off her debt. After that, she'd be free. If she survived. Now, standing on that platform while the sun mocked her with its cheerful warmth, Beatrice understood that freedom was a lie. Even if she survived 5 years of servitude, she'd emerge with nothing. No home, no savings, no prospects. She'd be 47 years old, worn down by labor, and right back where she started. The system was designed to break people like her, to grind them into dust, while men like Vernon Blake grew fat on their suffering. 25 cents, someone shouted, and laughter rippled through the crowd. 50 cents, countered another, as if bidding on a broken tool. Beatrice's face burned with humiliation, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, looking past the crowd to the distant mountains. She imagined herself there, far from this hell, living free in the wilderness like the stories she'd read as a girl. It was a fantasy, but fantasies were all she had left. 50 cents going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Come on, folks. Surely someone needs a strong back and willing hands. I ain't willing, Beatrice finally snapped, her voice cutting through the murmurs. And I ain't going to be neither. Whoever buys me better know they're getting 5 years of resistance and rebellion. I won't cook willing. I won't clean willing. I'll do the bare minimum to keep from being whipped, and not one thing more. You day want an obedient servant? Look elsewhere." The crowd went silent. This was unprecedented. Slaves and servants were supposed to accept their lot with quiet resignation, but Beatrice Sullivan had never been good at accepting anything quietly. "Mrs. Sullivan," the auctioneer said nervously, "you're not helping your situation. Maybe if you showed a more cooperative attitude, someone might be willing to offer a decent price." "Decent?" Beatrice laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "There's nothing decent about this. You're selling human beings like cattle, and you want me to smile and curtsy? To hell with that. To hell with all of you." Vernon Blake stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "Shut your mouth, woman. You're in debt to civilized society, and you'll damn well show some gratitude that we're giving you a chance to work it off, instead of throwing you in prison." Beatrice turned her full attention to the banker, her eyes blazing. "Civilized? You call this civilized? My husband worked himself to death trying to pay your usurious interest rates. When he got sick, you wouldn't extend our loan by even a month. You foreclosed on a grieving widow and then had the gall to call it legal. You're not civilized, Blake. You're a vulture in a fancy suit." The banker's hand went to his hip where a pistol hung. For a moment, Beatrice thought he might actually shoot her. Part of her almost welcomed it. Death would be quicker than 5 years of servitude. But before Blake could do anything stupid, a new voice cut through the tension. $2. The crowd turned as one. A man sat on horseback at the edge of the square, having ridden up so quietly no one had noticed. He was tall and lean, maybe 35 years old, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore simple working clothes, a battered hat, and a gun belt that looked well used but not flashy. Everything about him suggested a man who valued function over appearance. $2 for the woman, he repeated, his voice calm and even. "And I want it understood right now that I'm not buying a slave. I'm buying out her debt. Once the paperwork's signed, she's free to go her own way." The auctioneer blinked in confusion. "But, sir, the terms of the auction specify 5 years of labor. That's what you'd be paying for. Then change the terms." The man dismounted with fluid grace, approaching the platform. His eyes found Beatrice's, and she saw something there she hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Not pity, not lust, not contempt, just simple human respect. "I'm not interested in owning anyone. I've got money to spare and a dislike for bullies. This whole auction is barbaric, and I won't participate except to end it for at least one person," Vernon Blake sputtered. "Now see here, this is a legal proceeding. You can't just purchase someone and set them free. That defeats the entire purpose." The stranger turned his winter blue eyes on the banker. "The purpose seems to be enriching you at the expense of people who've already lost everything. So yes, I suppose I am defeating it. Do you have a problem with that?" His hand didn't move toward his gun, but something in his posture suggested he knew exactly how to use it. Blake, for all his bluster, took a step back. Clarence Potts, the auctioneer, sensed an opportunity to escape this increasingly uncomfortable situation. $2, he said quickly. "Going once, going twice, sold. To the gentleman with the, generous spirit. Please see me afterward to handle the paperwork." The stranger nodded and turned back to Beatrice. "You can come down now, ma'am. You're free." Beatrice descended the platform steps on shaky legs, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. When she reached ground level, she found herself face to face with her unexpected savior. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. This was a man who'd lived hard and survived it. "Why?" she asked simply. He shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. "Besides, I meant what I said. I don't believe in owning people. My name's Jacob Hartwell, by the way. I've got a ranch about 20 miles north of here. Not much, but it's mine, free and clear, Beatrice Sullivan, though I guess you knew that. She glanced back at the platform, where two more widows still waited, their faces a mixture of hope and envy. Why just me? Why not buy them all out? Jacob followed her gaze. Because I've got enough money to free one person today, not three. Had to make a choice. You looked like you'd rather die than submit, and I respect that. The others, they seem resigned. They'll survive. But you? I figured you'd do something desperate if forced into servitude. Maybe hurt someone, maybe hurt yourself. Beatrice felt tears threatening, but blinked them back furiously. So you bought me out of pity? No, Jacob said firmly. I bought you out because nobody should have to stand on that platform. Because this whole system is wrong, and because sometimes you've got to do something, even if it's small, even if it doesn't fix everything. You do what you can with what you have. They stood there for a moment, two strangers connected by an unexpected act of decency in a world that seemed increasingly short on such things. Then Jacob cleared his throat. I need to handle the paperwork with that weasel of an auctioneer. You can wait by my horse if you want, or if you'd rather walk away right now, I understand. Like I said, you're free, no obligations. Beatrice watched as Jacob walked toward Clarence Potts, money in hand. She looked around the square, at the townspeople, who'd come to gawk at the widow auction like it was entertainment, at Vernon Blake, who glared at her with undisguised hatred, and the distant mountains where her fantasy of freedom lived. And then she looked at Jacob Hartwell's horse, a sturdy roan mare with kind eyes. She walked over and ran a hand along the horse's neck, feeling the warmth of living flesh under her palm. The mare nickered softly, pressing into her touch. "What's your name, girl?" Beatrice whispered. "Patience," Jacob said, approaching with a rolled document. He handed it to Beatrice. "This is your debt cancellation. It's all legal and official. You're square with the county, free and clear." Beatrice unrolled the paper, scanning the legal language. It was real. $2 had bought her freedom. It seemed impossible, absurd. 3 years of grinding poverty and desperation, ended by a stranger's impulse. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Don't say anything," Jacob replied. "Just if you need a place to figure things out to get your bearings, my ranch has a spare room. The offer stands. No strings, no expectations. You stay as long as you need, then move on when you're ready." Beatrice studied him, looking for the angle. Men didn't do things for nothing. There was always a price, always a hidden motive. But Jacob's face showed nothing but honest intention. Either he was the best liar she'd ever met, or he was telling the truth. Why would you offer that? "We're strangers." Jacob mounted Patience, then looked down at Beatrice. His expression was distant, remembering something painful. "My mother was widowed when I was 12. Man she worked for, he was kind at first. Gave her a job, a place to stay. Then he started expecting more. Things she didn't want to give. She had no choice, no way out. I was too young to protect her. By the time I was old enough, she died. Took her own life rather than endure another day of it." He paused, his jaw tight. "I swore then that if I ever had the means, I'd help women in situations like that. Give them choices. Give them freedom without strings attached. So that's why, Mrs. Sullivan, because I couldn't save my mother. But maybe I can give you the chance she never had." Beatrice felt something crack inside her chest, some hard shell she'd built around her heart. This man, this stranger, had just given her more than money. He'd given her dignity. He'd treated her like a human being worth saving, not because she was young or pretty or useful, but simply because she was a person in need. "I accept," she said quietly, "your offer. I'll come to your ranch. Not because I need charity, but because I need time to think, to plan, to figure out what comes next. But I warn you, Mr. Hartwell, I'm not easy to live with. I'm stubborn and opinionated, and I don't suffer fools. You might regret this kindness." Jacob smiled for the first time, transforming his weathered face. "Most worthwhile things come with complications, Mrs. Sullivan. I think I can handle it. Besides, you already warned everyone you wouldn't be obedient. I heard you, loud and clear. I'm not looking for obedience. Just honest company and maybe someone to tell me when I'm being an idiot. Think you can manage that?" Despite everything, despite the humiliation and rage and confusion, Beatrice found herself smiling back. "I excel at it, actually. It's one of my few talents. Then we should get along just fine." He extended a hand to help her mount behind him. "It's a long ride to the ranch. We should get started before dark." Beatrice took his hand, letting him pull her up. The horse shifted under their combined weight but held steady. As they rode out of Copper Ridge, Beatrice looked back one last time at the auction platform, at the life she was leaving behind. Vernon Blake stood glaring, defeated and furious. The other widows watched with envious eyes, and the crowd dispersed, already forgetting about the fat widow who dared to defy convention. But Beatrice Sullivan wasn't forgetting. She was done being humiliated, done being broken by men who saw her as less than human. Jacob Hartwell had given her an unexpected gift, not just freedom, but the chance to rebuild herself on her own terms, and she'd be damned if she wasted it. The ride to Jacob Hartwell's ranch took 4 hours, winding through high desert country where sagebrush and juniper dotted the landscape like stubborn survivors. Beatrice said nothing for the first hour, her mind churning with too many thoughts to articulate. Jacob seemed content with the silence, only occasionally pointing out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a creek that ran year-round, the distant peak where mountain lions sometimes prowled. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of copper and flame, they crested a ridge, and Beatrice saw the ranch spread before them. It wasn't much, as Jacob had warned. A small house built of rough-hewn logs, a barn that looked solid if unadorned, a corral with a handful of horses, and fields that showed signs of hard but successful cultivation. It was modest, but it was clearly a working ranch, not some pretense. "It's not fancy," Jacob said as they descended toward the house, "but it's honest. Everything you see, I built with my own hands. Took me 10 years, working cattle drives in the summer and saving every penny. Bought the land 5 years ago, been building ever since. It's beautiful," Beatrice said, and meant it. There was something deeply satisfying about the ranch's simple functionality. No false fronts, no pretensions. Just a man's hard work made manifest. A dog emerged from the barn as they approached, a large mixed breed with more enthusiasm than grace. It bounded toward them, tail wagging so hard its entire rear end swung back and forth. Jacob dismounted and greeted the dog with affection. "This fool is Brutus. He looks fierce, but he's actually terrified of chickens, completely useless as a guard dog." Beatrice climbed down from the horse, her body protesting after the long ride. Brutus immediately transferred his attention to her, sniffing her skirts with intense interest. "He's checking to see if you have food," Jacob explained. "He's always hungry. Makes 2 of us, I suppose. Speaking of which, I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook. Can manage beans and bacon without poisoning myself, but that's about the limit of my skills." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Is this where you expect me to offer to cook in exchange for your hospitality?" Jacob looked genuinely startled. "What? No! I just meant, well, we'll both have to suffer through my cooking unless you want to fend for yourself. I've got supplies. You're welcome to use the kitchen however you like." "But I wasn't hinting at anything, I swear." She studied his face, looking for deception, and found only honest embarrassment. "All right, then. I believe you. And as it happens, I'm a very good cook. One of the few things I do well. So if you don't mind, I'd like to make dinner. Not out of obligation, but because eating beans and bacon for the foreseeable future sounds dismal." Jacob grinned. I won't argue with that. Kitchen's yours if you want it. The house's interior surprised Beatrice with its tidiness. She'd expected a bachelor's mess, but while sparse, everything was clean and organized. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Simple furniture, handmade but sturdy, filled the space. No decorations except a single photograph on the mantel, a woman with kind eyes and a weary smile. "That's my mother," Jacob said softly, following her. "Gaze, taken a year before she died. It's the only picture I have of her. She was beautiful. She was strong, stronger than she knew." He cleared his throat, shifting away from painful memories. "The spare room is through that door. It's not much, just a bed and a chest of drawers, but it's private and the roof doesn't leak. You can settle in while I tend to patients. Then we'll figure out dinner." Beatrice found the room exactly as described. Small, simple, clean. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a wooden chest, a single window looking out toward the mountains. After 3 years of uncertainty, of never knowing where she'd sleep from 1 month to the next, having a room with a door that closed felt like unimaginable luxury. She sat on the bed, testing its firmness, and only then did she allow herself to cry. Great racking sobs that shook her substantial frame, releasing 3 years of fear and humiliation and desperate struggle. She cried for her dead husband, for her lost home, for her shattered dignity. She cried for the woman she'd been before. Debt and desperation had carved away everything soft. When the tears finally stopped, Beatrice felt hollowed out, but cleaner somehow, as if the crying had washed away some of the poison that had accumulated in her soul. She stood, straightened her dress, and walked to the kitchen to cook her first meal as a free woman. Jacob had set out supplies: potatoes, onions, a ham that looked reasonable, flour, butter, eggs, and various seasonings, not a terrible selection for a bachelor rancher. Beatrice assessed the ingredients with a practiced eye, already planning. Within minutes, she had a fire going in the stove and was peeling potatoes with efficient movements. Jacob returned from the barn to find the kitchen transformed. Delicious smells filled the air. Beatrice moved around the space with the confidence of someone in her element, chopping and stirring and tasting. He stood in the doorway, watching with something like wonder. "You weren't kidding about being a good cook. I told you, it's one of my few talents." Beatrice didn't look up from her work. "The others are speaking my mind, which most people hate, and being stubborn, which is only useful in specific circumstances. But cooking I can do." They ate at the simple wooden table as twilight deepened outside. Beatrice had produced a meal that seemed impossible from the humble ingredients. Crispy potatoes with herbs, ham glazed with honey and mustard, biscuits that melted on the tongue, and somehow a simple salad from greens she'd found in Jacob's neglected garden. Jacob ate 3 helpings, barely pausing to breathe. "This is the best meal I've had in 5 years, maybe 10. How did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother," Beatrice said. "She worked as a cook for a wealthy family back east before she married my father. She taught me everything, said a woman who could cook would never starve, and she was right. When Thomas and I were struggling, I kept us alive by baking pies and selling them. It wasn't enough to save the farm, but it kept us from going hungry. Tell me about him, your husband. If you don't mind talking about it." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, remembering. Thomas was a dreamer, always had some scheme that would make us rich. He meant well, but he wasn't practical. He bought that farm on credit, sure he could make it profitable in a few years, worked himself half to death trying. When the pneumonia took him, part of me was angry. Angry that he'd left me with his debts and his dreams, and no way to pay for either. But you loved him. I did. He made me laugh. In a world that constantly told me I was too big, too loud, too much, Thomas thought I was perfect exactly as I was. That's rare, Mr. Hartwell. A man who loves a woman without trying to change her. Call me Jacob. And you're right. It is rare. He stood to clear the dishes, but Beatrice waved him off. You cooked, I'll clean. It's only fair. I thought this wasn't about obligation. It's not. It's about me being organized and hating a messy kitchen. Sit down, Jacob. Tell me about this ranch. How does a man end up out here alone, with a dog named Brutus and a talent for building things? So Jacob talked while Beatrice cleaned, and slowly, through the mundane conversation, two lonely people began to see each other as something other than rescuer and rescued. Jacob told her about his years on cattle drives, about learning the land, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Beatrice spoke of her childhood, her brief happy years with Thomas, and her determination never to be helpless again. "I'm going to need work," Beatrice said, as she dried the last dish. "Real work, that pays. I won't live on charity, even kind charity. So tomorrow I'll start looking for employment in the nearest town. I can cook, I can manage books, I can do laundry. Something will turn up." Jacob frowned. The nearest town, with any real employment opportunities, is 3 days' ride from here. And I'll be honest, Mrs. Sullivan, most people in these parts are like the folks in Copper Ridge. They'll see you and make assumptions. It'll be hard. I'm aware. I'm fat, middle-aged, and have no connections. But I'm also debt-free for the first time in 3 years, and I'll be damned if I waste that. I'll work as hard as it takes. What if the work was here? Beatrice turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Jacob stood, pacing to the window. "I meant what I said about no obligations, but the truth is this ranch is too much for one person. I've been making do, but I'm behind on everything. The garden's mostly dead. The barn needs repairs. I've got chickens I never collect eggs from because I'm always working somewhere else. And God knows I can't cook worth a damn." He turned to face her. "I'm not asking you to be a servant, and I'm not asking for anything improper. But if you're looking for work, I've got work that needs doing. I can pay. Not much, but fair wages. And you'd have a safe place to stay while you figure out your next step." Beatrice crossed her arms. "Define fair wages. $30 a month. Room and board. That's what ranch hands make in these parts. You'd be doing different work, but it's just as valuable, maybe more. And before you ask, no, I'm not trying to buy your gratitude or your company. I genuinely need help, and you genuinely need work. It's practical. What would people say? An unmarried woman living on a bachelor's ranch. Let them talk," Jacob said with surprising heat. "I'm 40 years old, and I've spent the last decade proving myself to people who'll never fully accept me anyway. I'm the son of a suicide, Mrs. Sullivan. In some circles, that makes me tainted. I stopped caring about gossip a long time ago. The question is, can you handle it?" Beatrice thought about the auction platform, about standing in front of the town while they mocked and belittled her. After that humiliation, rural gossip seemed almost quaint. "I can handle it. But I have conditions. Name them first. You call me Beatrice, not Mrs. Sullivan. If we're going to work together, we should use actual names. Second, I need 1 day a week to myself, to think, to rest, to not be useful to anyone. Third, if I find other employment or decide to move on, you accept that without argument. And fourth," she met his eyes steadily, "if you ever expect anything beyond what we've agreed to, if you ever make me feel uncomfortable or obligated in any way, I leave immediately. Understood?" Jacob extended his hand. "Understood. Do we have a deal?" Beatrice looked at his hand, calloused from work, extended in honest partnership. Slowly, she reached out and shook it. "Deal. I start tomorrow, and I'm warning you now, I'm going to reorganize your entire kitchen." "It's a disaster," he laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Fair enough. I'll stay out of your way." That night, lying in the small bed in her private room, Beatrice stared at the ceiling and marveled at the strange turns life could take. This morning she'd been standing on an auction platform, being sold like livestock. Tonight she was employed, housed, and, for the first time in years, she had a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. She didn't kid herself. This arrangement was temporary. Jacob was kind, but kindness didn't pay long-term bills. She'd need to save money, make plans, figure out what an overweight middle-aged widow could do to build an actual future. But for now, for tonight, she had a roof over her head and a door she could lock. It was more than enough. In the main room, Jacob sat by the fireplace with Brutus at his feet, staring into the flames. He thought about his mother, about the choices she'd been denied, about the desperation that had driven her to death. He thought about Beatrice Sullivan's defiant voice on that auction platform, refusing to be broken even as the world tried its hardest. He'd told her he bought her freedom because it was right, and that was true. But there was another truth he hadn't mentioned. He'd seen his mother in Beatrice's eyes, that same fierce refusal to submit, that same core of strength that circumstances tried to crush. And maybe, by helping Beatrice, he was finally doing what he'd been too young and powerless to do for his mother. It wouldn't bring her back, wouldn't erase the guilt, but it was something. A small act of redemption in a world that seemed increasingly short on second chances. Outside, the desert night settled around the ranch, vast and indifferent. But inside, two damaged people had found something unexpected. An alliance, a partnership, and perhaps the beginning of mutual healing. Subscribe to our channel to discover how Beatrice and Jacob's partnership evolves, and whether two broken people can build something whole from their shared scars. In the final chapter, the past comes calling, forcing both of them to decide between safety and courage, between hiding from the world and claiming their place in it. Don't miss the powerful conclusion to this story of dignity, defiance, and unexpected redemption. 3 months passed at the ranch, and Beatrice Sullivan transformed it. The garden, once neglected and wild, now flourished with vegetables in neat rows. The chickens, properly tended, produced enough eggs to sell in the distant town. The barn. Repairs were completed, the house spotlessly clean, and meals appeared with clockwork regularity. But more than the physical improvements, there was a sense of order, of purpose that hadn't existed before. Jacob found himself looking forward to evenings, to sitting at the table while Beatrice cooked, and they talked about everything and nothing. She was sharp-tongued and opinionated, just as she'd warned, but Jacob discovered he enjoyed her frank observations. She didn't defer to him or soften her words. She treated him as an equal, challenging his ideas and sometimes changing his mind with her arguments. For Beatrice, the ranch became something unexpected, a home. Not in the permanent sense, she still planned to eventually move on, but in the feeling of belonging somewhere. Jacob never made her feel like a burden or a charity case. He paid her wages on time, respected her space, and seemed genuinely grateful for her work. It was the first time since Thomas died that she felt valued for something beyond her usefulness, but the outside world had not forgotten Beatrice Sullivan. The trouble arrived on a cold October morning in the form of Vernon Blake and 3 hired men. They rode up to the ranch with the arrogance of people accustomed to getting their way, their horses trampling Beatrice's carefully tended garden. Jacob was mending fence in the far field when he heard Brutus barking frantically. He dropped his tools and ran toward the house, arriving to find Beatrice on the porch, a shotgun in her hands, facing down the 4 mounted men. "You've got no business here, Blake," Beatrice was saying, her voice steady despite the weapon trembling, slightly in her grip. "I paid my debt. I'm free and clear." Vernon Blake, dismounted now, sneered at her. That transaction was invalid. A debt can't be paid off for $2 when the original amount was over $200. We've consulted with territorial lawyers. The sale is void. You still owe the county, Sullivan, and this time we're not doing any auction. You're coming. With us to work off your debt the proper way. The proper way being what exactly? Jacob's voice cut across the yard as he approached, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Slavery? Because that's what you're describing. Stay out of this, Hartwell, Blake warned. This is county business. The woman lives and works on my ranch. That makes it my business. He moved to stand beside Beatrice close enough that she could feel his solid presence, and I've got the paperwork right here that says her debt is paid, all legal and proper, signed by your own auctioneer. Blake's face reddened. That little weasel Potts had no authority to set the terms. The county sets the terms, and the county says 5 years of labor. Now either she comes willingly, or we take her by force. Your choice. Over my dead body, Beatrice said quietly, raising the shotgun. One of Blake's hired men, a lean gunslinger type with dead eyes, laughed. That can be arranged, fat woman. You think we're scared of some rancher and his plump whore? Jacob's gun was in his hand before Beatrice even registered him moving. The speed was shocking, the weapon appearing as if by magic. Say another word about her. Jacob's voice was ice and iron, and I'll put a bullet between your eyes. The gunslinger's smile faded. He'd clearly not expected this kind of response. His hand moved toward his own weapon, and for a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Stand down, Ben, Blake ordered quickly. Then to Jacob. You're making a mistake, Hartwell. You can't win this. We've got the law on our side. No, Jacob said, guns still trained on the hired man. You've got a corrupt interpretation of an unjust law. But since you want to play lawyer, let's talk facts. Beatrice Sullivan's debt was legally cancelled through a public auction, properly conducted and witnessed. If you want to challenge that, take it to a real court, but you're not taking her anywhere today. Blake's eyes narrowed. You'd really shoot a man over a fat widow you barely know. I'd shoot 4 men if that's what it takes, Jacob replied calmly. Because I don't believe in slavery, even when you dress it up with legal language. And because nobody is taking Beatrice from this ranch unless she chooses to go. Now get off my land before I decide you're trespassing and defend my property accordingly. For a long moment no one moved. Then Blake remounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. This isn't over, Hartwell. We'll be back with proper legal authority. Federal marshals if necessary. You can't hide behind your gun forever. I'm not hiding behind anything, Jacob said. I'm standing in front of something. There's a difference. Now ride out before I lose my temper. Blake and his men departed, their horses destroying more of the garden on their way out. As soon as they were out of sight, Beatrice's legs gave way. She sat heavily on the porch steps, the shotgun clattering beside her. I'm sorry, she said, her voice shaking. I should have known they wouldn't let it go. I've brought trouble to your door, Jacob. Maybe I should just go with them next time. Let them have their 5 years. It's not worth you dying over, don't you dare. Jacob sat beside her, his gun finally holstered. Don't you dare give those vultures what they want. Blake doesn't care about the debt. He cares about power, about putting you in your place. If you surrender to that, you're saying his way is right and it's not, but what can we do? They'll come back with marshals like he said. We can't fight the federal government. Maybe not. But we can make our case to a real judge, get a proper legal opinion. And if that fails, Jacob met her eyes steadily, we run. I've got some money saved. We could go to California, start fresh. You could open a restaurant. God knows you cook well enough. I could work cattle or find land. It wouldn't be this ranch, but it would be free. Beatrice stared at him. You'd give up everything you've built? For me? Not for you, for what's right. And maybe a little bit for you. He smiled slightly. You've become important to me, Beatrice. Not in any improper way. Just as a friend. Maybe the best friend I've had. This ranch means something, but it's still just wood and land. You're a person. People matter more than property. Beatrice felt tears burning her eyes. No one's ever chosen me over something valuable before. Thomas loved me, but even he put his dreams ahead of my security sometimes. But you'd walk away from 10 years of work? In a heartbeat, Jacob said simply. Now let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we fight this legally. I know a good lawyer in Denver, man who helped me with the land title. We'll send him a telegram. Get his opinion. If Blake wants a legal fight, we'll give him one. Over the next 2 weeks, telegrams flew back and forth. Jacob's lawyer, a sharp man named Theodore Brennan, confirmed what they'd hoped. The auction was legal and binding. Blake had no grounds to void the sale unless he could prove fraud or coercion, neither of which existed. More than that, Brennan found precedent cases where similar debt auctions had been successfully challenged as unconstitutional forms of involuntary servitude. But there was a catch. To properly fight this, they'd need to take it to territorial court. That meant traveling to Denver, appearing before a judge, and presenting their case. It would be expensive, time-consuming, and there were no guarantees. How much? Beatrice asked. When Jacob explained the situation, $300, maybe more. Court fees, lawyer costs, travel expenses, and that's assuming we win. If we lose, I'm out the money and Blake will have you for 5 years, regardless. Beatrice did the math in her head. I've saved nearly $60 from my wages. You've probably spent close to $200 already between buying out my debt, the lawyer, everything else. Jacob, this is madness. I'm not worth $500. Yes, you are, Jacob said firmly. But it's not just about worth. It's about precedent. If Blake wins, he'll do this to every debtor in the county. He'll turn debt into a weapon to control people. Someone has to stand against it, or it never stops. A thought occurred to Beatrice. Why is Blake so obsessed with me specifically? He could go after any number of debtors. Why pursue this so hard? Jacob had wondered the same thing, so he rode to Copper Ridge the next day and paid a visit to Margaret Chen, the boarding house owner who seemed to know everything that happened in the territory. Margaret invited him in, poured coffee and listened to his question. Then she sighed heavily. Vernon Blake had a sister, she said. Name was Martha. She was overweight, like Beatrice. When Martha was 20, Blake spent a fortune trying to marry her off to respectable men. None would have her. She ended up marrying a poor farmer against Vernon's wishes. The farmer treated her terribly, worked her to death. She died 5 years ago, broken and miserable. Jacob felt ice in his veins. And Blake blames overweight women for his sister's suffering? Worse, Margaret said. He blames Martha for embarrassing him. In his twisted mind, she deserved what she got for being fat and unmarriageable. When Beatrice defied him at that auction, standing up there bold as brass and refusing to be ashamed, it enraged him. She represented everything he hated about his sister, the defiance he wished Martha had shown, the refusal to accept society's judgment. So now he's obsessed with breaking Beatrice the way life broke Martha. So this isn't about debt at all. It never was. It's about a cruel man punishing a woman for having the courage his sister lacked and for daring to be happy despite her size. Jacob rode back to the ranch with this knowledge burning in his chest. That evening, he told Beatrice what he'd learned. She listened in silence, her face unreadable. So I remind him of a sister he despised, she said finally. That's why he's so determined to destroy me. Because I won't be destroyed. Exactly, Jacob said. Which means he'll never stop. Not unless we beat him so decisively he has no choice. Then we fight, Beatrice declared. We go to Denver. We face that judge and we win. Not just for me, but for every Martha Blake in the world who couldn't fight back. For every woman told she's worthless because of her size or her age or her circumstances. We make a statement that defiance isn't a crime and dignity isn't negotiable. Jacob smiled. That's the spirit. Though I should warn you, the trial will be public. People will stare. They'll judge. It might be worse than the auction. Let them stare, Beatrice said with fierce determination. I stood on that platform once and let shame nearly break me, but I'm not that woman anymore. Blake's obsession created something he never anticipated. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He wanted to break me. He gave me a reason to be unbreakable. They left for Denver 3 days later, leaving the ranch in the care of a neighboring farmer who owed Jacob a favor. The journey took a week, and Beatrice spent much of it rehearsing her testimony with Theodore Brennan, who met them in Cheyenne and traveled with them the rest of the way. Brennan was a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses and a mind like a steel trap. He prepared Beatrice for every possible question, every angle Blake's lawyers might use to discredit her. And he taught her something crucial. In court, truth was only half the battle. Presentation mattered. Dignity mattered. The judge needed to see her not as a debt statistic, but as a human being worthy of justice. The trial took place on a cold November morning in a courtroom packed with spectators. Word had spread about the case, the widow fighting against involuntary servitude, and it had captured public imagination. Some came to support Beatrice, others came hoping to see her humiliated. All came for the spectacle. Vernon Blake sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 expensive lawyers, his face smug with confidence. He clearly expected to win, to see Beatrice dragged away in chains, but he hadn't counted on Theodore Brennan's meticulous preparation. Brennan opened with a devastating argument. He presented the auction documents, proving they were legal and properly executed. He cited 3 territorial precedents where similar debt sales had been upheld. He brought character witnesses who testified to Beatrice's honest attempts to pay her debts before the auction. And then he called Jacob to the stand. "Mr. Hartwell," Brennan asked, "why did you purchase Mrs. Sullivan's debt at that auction?" "Because the whole proceeding was barbaric," Jacob said clearly. "Because I don't believe in owning people, and that auction was slavery with a legal veneer. I bought her debt with the express intention of cancelling it, which I did immediately. Blake's lead lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Crenshaw, cross-examined aggressively. Isn't it true, Mr. Hartwell, that you and Mrs. Sullivan are now living together at your ranch?" "She works for me," Jacob corrected. "For fair wages, doing legitimate labor. Come now, an unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. Surely you can see how that appears improper." "Only to people with filthy minds," Jacob replied calmly. "Mrs. Sullivan is my employee and my friend. Nothing improper has occurred, and frankly, what 2 adults do in their private lives is nobody's business but their own." The gallery murmured. The judge, a stern man named Whitmore, banged his gavel. "Answer the questions, Mr. Hartwell, without editorial." Then Beatrice took the stand. Brennan walked her through her story. Her husband's death, her desperate attempts to pay the debt, the humiliation of the auction. Her voice never wavered. She spoke with the same defiant clarity she'd shown on that auction platform. When Crenshaw cross-examined, he tried to shake her. "Mrs. Sullivan, isn't it true that you could have paid your debt if you'd simply worked harder, been more frugal?" Beatrice met his eyes without flinching. "I worked 16-hour days, Mr. Crenshaw. I sold everything I owned except the clothes on my back. I went to bed hungry most nights to save money for debt payments. The interest on my loan grew faster than I could earn. The system was designed so I'd fail. And when I did fail, men like Mr. Blake used that failure to strip away my freedom. So no, I couldn't have worked harder. I could only have died sooner." The courtroom went silent. Even Crenshaw seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "Isn't it true," he tried again, "that you threatened violence at the auction? That you said you wouldn't obey whoever purchased you?" "I said I wouldn't be willing," Beatrice corrected. "That I'd resist being treated as property, because I'm a human being, Mr. Crenshaw, not livestock. And human beings don't obey. They cooperate. They work together. They maintain their dignity even when the world tries to strip it away. Yes, I said I'd resist, because the alternative was accepting that I was something less than human. And I'll be damned if I ever accept that." Crenshaw tried several more approaches, but Beatrice wouldn't be rattled. She answered every question with the same unflinching honesty, the same refusal to be ashamed of her circumstances or her body or her defiance. Finally, Brennan called his surprise witness Margaret Chen. The boarding house owner testified about Blake's obsession with Beatrice, about his dead sister, about comments he'd made suggesting his pursuit was personal rather than legal. It was hearsay, technically inadmissible, but Brennan argued it spoke to Blake's motivation, and the court's ruling should consider whether this was a legitimate debt collection or personal harassment. Blake's face went purple with rage. "Objection!" he shouted, rising from his seat. "This is character assassination." Judge Whitmore studied Blake coldly. "Sit down, Mr. Blake. You've made this case intensely personal by pursuing it beyond all reasonable bounds. The court will consider all relevant context." He turned to the lawyers. Final arguments. Brennan's closing was masterful. He painted Beatrice as a symbol of everyone crushed by an unjust system, fighting not just for herself, but for every person trapped by impossible debt. He cited the 13th Amendment, arguing that forcing someone into years of involuntary labor for debt was unconstitutional, regardless of legal technicalities. And he ended with a challenge. "Your Honor, we stand at a crossroads. We can uphold a system that turns poverty into chains, that gives wealthy men like Mr. Blake the power to own other human beings through legal manipulation. Or we can say that in this territory, in this nation, freedom means something more than words on paper. It means every person, regardless of their circumstances, has the right to dignity, to self-determination, to stand up and say, 'I will not be owned.'" Mrs. Sullivan said those words on an auction platform 3 months ago. Today, we ask this court to affirm that she had every right to say them. Crenshaw's closing was weak by comparison, relying on technical legal arguments about the original debt terms. He never addressed the fundamental injustice, never explained why 5 years of servitude was appropriate for $200 of debt. He simply argued that the law was the law and should be followed. Judge Whitmore called a recess to deliberate. 2 hours passed, each minute an eternity. Beatrice sat with Jacob in a small anteroom, neither speaking. Finally, the bailiff called them back. The courtroom was packed even tighter than before. Judge Whitmore took his seat, his expression unreadable. "I've reviewed the evidence and arguments carefully," he began. "This case raises profound questions about the nature of debt, servitude, and human dignity in our territory. The law allows for debt auctions under certain circumstances, but the law must also align with fundamental constitutional principles." He paused, looking directly at Vernon Blake. "Mr. Blake, your pursuit of this case strikes me as motivated more by personal animus than legitimate debt collection. The original auction was properly conducted. The purchaser had every right to set the terms of Mrs. Sullivan's subsequent freedom. Your attempts to void that transaction appear to be harassment rather than justice." Blake's face went from purple to white. Furthermore, the judge continued, "The principle of forcing someone into years of involuntary labor for modest debts is deeply troubling. While this court cannot overturn territorial law, it can interpret it narrowly, and my interpretation is this. Once a debt has been legally satisfied through an authorized auction, that debt is extinguished. Any attempt to recreate that debt or impose additional servitude constitutes an abuse of legal process." Whitmore picked up his gavel. "Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendants. Mrs. Sullivan's debt is declared fully satisfied. Mr. Blake's claim is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be brought again. Furthermore, I'm ordering Mr. Blake to pay court costs and legal fees for both parties as punishment for frivolous litigation. This case is closed." The gavel fell. Beatrice felt the world spin. She'd won. Actually won. Jacob grabbed her hand. Squeezing tight, Theodore Brennan allowed himself a small smile. and Vernon Blake stormed from the courtroom, his face a mask of impotent rage. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. News of the verdict had spread quickly. As Beatrice emerged, several people applauded, others simply watched with respect. She'd become, quite by accident, a symbol of resistance against unjust debt systems. A reporter from the Denver paper approached. "Mrs. Sullivan, how does it feel to be free?" Beatrice considered the question. "It feels like waking up after a long nightmare, like breathing clean air after being buried alive, but mostly it feels like responsibility, because I fought for myself. But there are thousands of others still trapped by debt they can't escape. This verdict doesn't help them, so the fight isn't over. It's just beginning." "What will you do now?" the reporter asked. Beatrice looked at Jacob, who stood beside her with a proud smile. "I'm going back to a ranch that needs tending. I'm going to work for fair wages and save my money. And someday, when I have enough, I'm going to open a restaurant where women like me, women who've been told they're worthless, can work with dignity, where being overweight or widowed or poor doesn't disqualify you from respect, where everyone gets a second chance." The reporter scribbled furiously. "And what would you say to other women in situations like yours? Stand up," Beatrice said firmly. "Refuse to be ashamed. Defiance isn't a crime. Dignity isn't negotiable. And you're worth more than any debt, any judgment, any cruel person's opinion. Fight for yourself, because if you don't, nobody else will." The interview concluded, and Jacob guided Beatrice away from the crowd. They walked through Denver's streets until they found a quiet restaurant. Over a celebratory meal, Jacob raised his glass. "To Beatrice Sullivan," he said, "the most stubborn, courageous, infuriating woman I've ever met. May you never lose that defiant spirit." Beatrice clinked her glass against his. "And to Jacob Hartwell, who saw a person worth saving when everyone else saw an auction lot number. May you always choose kindness over comfort." They returned to the ranch a week later to find everything in order. The neighboring farmer had maintained things well. Brutus nearly knocked them both over with his enthusiastic greeting. And the house, simple as it was, felt like home in a way Beatrice hadn't experienced since Thomas died. Over the following months, their partnership deepened. Jacob continued his ranching. Beatrice managed the household, tended her garden, and began selling baked goods to surrounding homesteads. She saved every penny, building toward her dream restaurant, and slowly, almost without noticing, they became a family of sorts. Not romantic, at least not yet, but deeply connected. Two broken people who'd found healing in honest work and mutual respect. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Beatrice spoke quietly. "You know, when I was standing on that auction platform, I wanted to die. I couldn't imagine anything worse than being sold like an animal. But if that hadn't happened, I'd never have come here, never have found this. So maybe the worst moment of my life led to the best thing that ever happened to me." Jacob nodded slowly. "I spent 10 years hating myself for not saving my mother. But maybe helping you was the way I finally forgave myself. Maybe we're both exactly where we need to be." Beatrice smiled. "Two broken people making something whole. Who would have thought? Not me," Jacob admitted. "But I'm glad we did. The ranch is better with you in it. I'm better with you in it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Two souls who'd found unexpected redemption in each other's company. Beatrice Sullivan had been told she was too much, too fat, too old, too defiant, too difficult. But Jacob Hartwell had seen something different. He'd seen strength, courage, and worth. And in seeing it, he'd helped her see it too. Thank you for joining us on Beatrice and Jacob's journey from humiliation to triumph. If this story of defiance, dignity, and unexpected partnership moved you, Subscribe to our channel for more tales from the Old West, where the outcasts become heroes and courage takes unexpected forms. Every story we share celebrates those who refused to be broken, who stood up when the world tried to push them down, and who proved that worth isn't measured by society's standards, but by the strength of the human spirit. Don't miss our upcoming narratives of redemption, resistance, and the revolutionary power of simple human kindness in an unforgiving land.